let's see here. You can navigate using these arrows over here, and you can drop little sticky notes that you can pull from this side of the Jamboard sort of toolbar, and drop your thoughts in there, drop your comments once you get in there, so that we're able to record this data that you're willing to provide us, and take this back to Reimagine Appalachia to start to understand where some of the technical resources are most needed, and how we can, again, leverage this once in a lifetime opportunity in the areas that you work in. Let's see, I'm not sure if I can delete that. There we go. So for instance, we're not going to leave you alone on this. We're going to give you a few examples of some of the predetermined example barriers we see over the course of our experience working with local communities. Anyone ever felt like this? This person here, just a lot of balls in the air all at once. And so I think, I'm not sure which presenter it was. It may have been the second gentleman that talked about, if you have a factory, you're worried about sort of producing the next unit at the most, profitable cost. You're not necessarily watching what the Inflation Reduction Act and how to navigate some of those issues are. And that's just on the private side. Then you have, the public side or nonprofit side, and everything that everyone's responsible for. And people always say that, oh, I don't have enough time to do it. And Quentin and I were joking about this is, time can sometimes be infinite. What I'm starting to realize is that we just don't have enough energy to dedicate to this, whether it be mental energy or physical energy. You can't possibly work 24 hours a day. So how much energy do you actually have to focus in on this while taking care of the other amount of responsibilities you have, and giving those other responsibilities the energy they require to complete them in an appropriate manner? And then does your organization or your area have enough capacity to take care of this? So sometimes there's grants that come across and they just slide by because you're not even watching the grants.gov or whatever information that is around there to really even understand them, or to see them and know that they're a reality, or more or less understand how to obtain that money. So example number 2, I really like this. I think the last speaker said it well, and I quoted her in the bottom there: organized and prepared. So we identified poor planning. I mean, how many times have you been a part that, hey, you got wind of this grant opportunity or this application, and you think it would be a really good fit, and you go to your local organization, municipality, nonprofit, and say, hey, we could really go for this, and they're like, we don't really have enough information on it. There hasn't been enough pre-planning. The data you need to really file a competitive application isn't on hand. So thinking through those steps for pre-development planning, comprehensive planning, or capital improvement planning, just to name a few of the example barriers that we see for number 2. Matching money, right? Some of these opportunities require you to put a little what they call skin in the game, right? Kind of make sure that you're a serious player to obtain these. So, are you willing to throw that small amount in the grand scheme of things? That 25%, that 50% match to obtain that big amount of money for the grant. In some communities, a lot of communities I work with, they are kind of a day-to-day operation. They have enough staff and capacity to keep the lights running, take care of the things that need to take. They have a budget in place that's predetermined, and they might not have enough in that, line item to match a larger federal opportunity that comes across. Grant administration. What are you prepared for success? Once you have those other 3, you've crossed those barriers, all of a sudden you get this award, you look at the laundry list of requirements that you need to fulfill and complete, or otherwise the grant, that might not be in compliance. We think about a grant as a contract with that funder. You need to fulfill these amount of requirements to make sure that contract is complete. So do you know which levers to pull at the right time to administer the grant appropriately in terms of advertising and, obtaining that qualified either consulting services or engineers or contractors, things along that line to make these projects and programs a reality. And then again, once again, do you have enough energy in the tank to actually oversee this and make sure that it's being done appropriately? And then example barrier number 5. We're talking about catalyzing consortiums here. How well are these siloed approaches, connected? How well are you communicating with other municipalities in your region, or simply just departments in your municipality? Do you have other partnerships with other non-government organizations that see the same vision that you see in your area and want to also move the needle on those issues in a similar direction as you? We often talk about breaking down silos. That can be messy. You can break that silo down and there would be, grain all over the place, right? So silos exist for a reason. There's a little bit of specialization contained within each silo, but how do we share that specialization with each? And so that we maximize the total effort of those silos for one unified purpose and bring that consortium together. So these are just a little bit of sort of get your creative juices flowing. We're designing this as a roundtable, and Quentin has a few questions here to get it started off. And with that said, please use the chat function. Please use the Jamboard to share your ideas, and we'll be monitoring both as we go through the next 30 minutes or so of sharing ideas and stories and where we can pull our collective resources together to reimagine Appalachia.
Yeah, thank you, Matt. Hi again, everybody. So first I wanted to start with the Jamboard. I see a few really big circles in there, particularly on the match money section and the poor planning section. I was wondering if anyone would want to come off mute and elaborate a little more, or share your experience with why you put the big circle. I can't see who it was, so.
Well, I'm one of the guys. Can you hear me?
Yes, thank you.
Okay. I put in a big circle. I didn't know how to, when I clicked on it, the big circle come up, and I don't know how in the hell to make it small, number one. But in a lot of the smaller communities in Southeast Ohio, which I live, we have trouble meeting that match money. And when you try to have in our budgets, we try to budget for some match, but it's awful difficult based on what projects you try to have in planning. So our match deals with the planning, and you mentioned that poor planning. Well, my community, we have poor planning because we have, let me say, our village council members and our mayor are working, or they have jobs where they work, and they don't have all the time to put into, the better planning, and we don't have the resources for that. But I may have put 2 or 3 of them big zeros in there for the match, but I did put one in for lack of planning too. I'm sorry. I hope that answers the question, but yeah, we have difficulty in because the work schedules is a really hindrance to our progress of our village moving forward, even with these new government funding that's come out.
Yeah, thank you.
Hey, Quentin, I want to ask Fred a quick follow-up question on that. So, Fred, in terms of does you said Southeast Ohio, do you have a planning commission or a planning committee assigned at all in the municipality that you represent?
No, the only representation and group that I belong to, I'm the former mayor, now city councilman, but I joined the Mayor's Partnership for Progress for there in Southeastern Ohio. It's a group of mayors that meet monthly from, I believe it's around 18 counties now. And they've been quite successful and quite helpful to one another in collaborating and going over the issues so we don't have to reinvent the wheel on the problems that we encounter in our small villages and the cities also.
All right. Any chance you work, so is that Mayors for Progress? Do they work with any, like, I guess Southeast Ohio, that would be kind of close to like the Buckeye Hills area of Southeast Ohio for Regional Planning Development Council?
Right. Buckeye Hills Regional Council is our main LDD, and and also Mid-Ohio Regional Planning Commission for our county. We belong to that too. So both of those two development districts help us in answering some of those questions. But we countywide, we don't have no development authority.
Sure. Well, Fred, I'd like to learn more about that. You know, I come from a decade's worth of regional planning where we help those small communities develop those comprehensive plans, and setting yourself up for success. And because I do hear what you're saying, and I think that the poor planning is actually more and also sort of a symptom of the lack of capacity and that first barrier, and learning how to set up those. And it can be even volunteer committees that come in and work once a month or once a quarter on developing a comprehensive plan or strategy, and then trying to implement that plan would be next. So there's a couple good best practices that small communities can take, and obviously it's geared towards that level of experience and what you have on the table and what could offer. So feel free to reach out to me in the future, and I can send you some links of what we've done for other communities in West Virginia in the past.
Well, I would very much appreciate that, and yeah, I'll try to stay in touch so we can try to come up with something.
Great.
When I was the mayor, I had Buckeye Hills up for several meetings to develop a planning strategy, and that went nowhere. I'm sorry, but that just, when there's 6 rocks in a box, I call them, does not want to move forward with, the vision I had. It just died, and it's still dead. I'm on city council, still fighting as I did last night for funding. So I'm going to keep still here, but yeah, I'll be in touch.
Thank you, Fred.
Michael, I see your hand is raised.
Yeah, Quentin, I put actually in the chat box a follow-on about the matching topic, that a lot of people are not aware that there's this broad category that across most government grants called in-kind contributions. And so I wanted to highlight that topic because when Matt was talking about budgets, that most people get stuck into thinking we have to have the actual cash to do the matching. And there is a broad spectrum of things, including, for example, volunteer time. If you can quantify the volunteer time in terms of X amount per hour, then the government will consider that to be the elements in the matching component. And to give you an example of one that most people might not think of, we were working on a grant application with EDA down in Puerto Rico, and we put a complementary currency on the table as our matching component. And the fact that we would use that to pay people that were doing work for the program in the complementary currency, and the agency accepted that as in-kind contribution.
Thank you. I want to say real quickly, so that's a solution, right, to the matchmaking. I want to just highlight that the additional slides in the Jamboard, opportunities for you to throw sticky notes that are solutions that you've encountered or ways to come up with getting around these barriers. So I just threw in that being creative, that in-kind counts towards contributions for matchmaking. So thank you for saying. Sure. We can keep going back to the circles throughout, but does anyone else want to share one circle that they added, one barrier they've encountered in their work trying to bring funds to your communities before we move on to some other questions?
I have a comment, Quentin. It's not really about the circles or anything, but one thing that I thought it would be helpful just to sort of put on the table is that federal agencies are really partners in this process, and they're feeling a lot of pressure to move this money and to get it to the regions that have been prioritized, so there's a certain amount of money that the Biden administration wants to see go to coal impacted communities. And then under the Justice 40 initiative, 40% of certain federal funds have to go to marginalized and disadvantaged communities. So they've got pressure to move money out in a certain time period and to get it to places where it's not traditionally flowed or where it might be more difficult to get it to. So I just say that to mean that there's an opportunity to build relationships with staff at federal agencies because they're trying to figure out how to get the money to our region. So, we have really strong relationships with staff at USDA, at US Department of Agriculture, USDA, at the Appalachian Regional Commission, ARC, at EPA, Environmental Protection Association. So there's a lot of, I think most federal agencies have staff. They're trying to figure out how to move this money. And so the question is how do you find them? How do you connect with them? I'd recommend going to events that they put together, especially if they have events in the region, but even national conferences are a good opportunity. And then talking to some of your nonprofits that are in the space that talk about themselves as connectors, that have relationships with federal agencies. The hub can certainly serve that for West Virginia. But I think that the more partnerships that you build with staff at federal agencies, the more they can help you think about what opportunities fit with what you're doing, who else in the state or in the region is doing similar stuff that you could partner with. They can just be great thought partners.
Stephanie, thanks for sharing that. I think that's a really great comment and exactly where we're trying to get to today with this breakout session in terms of an example solution. With that said, does the hub host these style of events that brings in these agency reps so that those relationships can begin to be built? And are there other states besides West Virginia or even other groups within West Virginia, but are there other examples of the hub working throughout Appalachia that some our attendees can maybe reach out to?
Okay, so for the first question, yes, we definitely do. We actually have an event coming up in Beckley on February 23rd that's about USDA funding. It's for the Rural Partnership Network that I mentioned before. And we're planning a conference later in the year that'll be about basically how to access federal funding and leverage federal funding. I'd also look at the energycommunities.gov website that I shared earlier, because they're often doing events and conferences that bring together a lot of different federal agencies. And I think for your last question, I would say that Reimagine Appalachia is a good resource to connect with groups across the region. I don't know if I could suggest groups in every state, but there are a lot of nonprofits that are working with federal partners, that are working across state lines, trying to work together. And so I think there's a lot of groups, just like Quentin's, that are looking at how do we make sure that this money gets to where it needs to get, and we don't miss the opportunity that we have right now with this level of funding.
Thank you.
Leo, I see your hand is raised.
Yeah, hi. My name's Leo Somaripa, and I work for company DNV that, among other things, runs energy efficiency programs on behalf of utilities. And I'm certainly not an expert on the IRA, but a lot of the programs that we run depend on the state Public Utility Commission figuring out how they want to structure that energy efficiency project incentive program. And from the perspective of silos, I think often, you might have municipalities that want to take advantage of this funding, but the state has to say how they want to use the federal funding before anyone within the state can take advantage of it. So I'm throwing out a topic area without, unfortunately, a lot of good information or answers, but that sometimes we have to work with the state regulators so that they can make certain streams of funding available from the federal government.
Leo, that's really good info. Do you mind dropping that that exact comment into one of this the Jamboard slides if you're able? Because let me know if you're not, because I think that's really great in terms of the poor planning, right? Because I know that like ARC, you have to meet those like state development planning objectives that the governor's office puts out. So how do you even engage if your project doesn't fit into one of those objectives or strategies? How do you begin engaging those folks to make sure that that particular one is included in that strategic plan?
Yeah, I totally agree with that, and I probably can put in a sticky note on that. Yeah, because I mean, I love what I'm hearing here, and a lot of it is about like getting funding for a specific project or a local program, and there's like a specific grant application. You have to know how to fill it out, and that's absolutely a significant part of IRA funding. But I think that there's other parts, and maybe when we get to the solar breakout session later today, we'll hear more about that. But some of the funding is more like the state sets up a program and then there's less of a personal application, but like, if you do this, then you qualify for this much money. And usually it's the states that have to structure how that works in their state. And so we need to work with the state legislators or regulators to help them structure that in a way that works for us. So it's kind of a different, it's a little bit more removed type of application. It's not like I need it specifically for this project, but we would like the program structured in this way so that we can take advantage of it. So there's a lot of research to do, and I'm sure folks at Department of Energy and stuff are trying to figure out how they want to set it up. But that's another angle.
Yeah. Thank you.
That's great.
It's important to remember, like what Stephanie said earlier about partnering with federal agencies, getting to know them. You should get to know your state agencies. And for the first time, like West Virginia, IRA, the funds coming out to us, maybe the first time that our state has to deal with sort of the goals and outcomes that the IRA is supposed to achieve. And so, it's important to get on the ground floor now while they're developing the applications before they roll out over the coming years. Eric, do you want to comment on something?
Yeah, hi. I just want to drive home Leo's point. I am one of those community organizations that works with local governments and also connects with federal agencies, state agencies to sort of, catalyze these different interactions. With the EECBG program, it's a perfect example of Leo's point where it's a formula grant that for energy efficiency for local governments. A lot of big governments are able to get that through the formula directly from the federal government, but a lot of smaller governments that I work with will not get direct funding. Instead, they have to work with their state energy programs office. And until they cannot do that, until the state energy programs office actually sets up what Leo's saying, which is a way to distribute the funds, a way for local governments to, to qualify and to work with them. So definitely setting up relationships with those middlemen as well, not just the federal agencies, is extremely important, at least here in Pennsylvania, but I'm sure it's the case elsewhere as well.
Great.
So another question I have to pose to the group is, who are the key stakeholders responsible for applying for funds in your community? And so with the IRA that my job has been focusing on, we've been focusing on the funding blocks that were required that cities partner with nonprofits. So in some instances, the city or local government or the state won't need to do any sort of community engagement at all to apply for a grant, but we want to make sure that the ones that require local participation and community groups are also being, solved. So in your communities, are you talking with the city officials who are applying for funds? Open question. Are you all familiar with people in your communities, your counties or towns who typically historically do apply for federal or state funds?
Yeah. So I think that could also go back to what Stephanie was saying in terms of building those relationships. Looks like there's some competitiveness there. So Chris is stating, Chris, do you mind sharing if you're willing to? Like, everyone seems to go after them. And it looks like Jordan has a comment after Chris, if they're willing to speak.
Sure.
Can you, Chris, you broke up there a little bit. Oh, Chris, I think we have a bad connection. If you're willing to share some of those ideas, your experience on the Jamboard, that would be great. And type it in and drop it in. Sorry we couldn't make that connection here on the audio. I see Jordan, you have your hand up. Jordan, you want to share?
Yeah, sure. Just real quickly, Jordan Lebetkin, National Wildlife Federation. I work on our Ohio River Restoration Program, which covers, the Ohio River Basin, the 14-state region. I think one thing that we are thinking about quite a bit in this region is that we've just hosted a series of listening sessions with communities, and we continue to do that into 2023. And a lot of the barriers, which I totally agree with, and this has been a great conversation, and I appreciate it, like these internal barriers with groups. One of the big things we hear, especially from communities that I think, as Stephanie mentioned, that have not traditionally received money, is the access to information about it. So one of the things that we're seeing is, while the federal agencies really do want to fulfill the vision and mission of like Justice 40 and a lot of the programs we've talked about, a lot of communities are not even hearing about it. So while all of these capacity, poor planning, and mudding matching, this is all relevant, salient, and acute. I think there's a step that's hugely problematic in that there aren't structures that have been set up to make sure that communities are being engaged. And I know for the first year or so, like with a proverbial money coming out of the fire hose, it's going to be an issue. But I think one of the things that we are trying to think through is, if we don't help set up structures long-term, this will continue to be the same old, So I would just say that one thing that we are trying to think about strategically is, how can we, as I think, again, Stephanie pointed out, work with agencies to create structures that we're resourcing communities long-term so they can be getting in on it at the front end. And I think that not an easy problem to solve, because again, both in rural and urban communities, they haven't been listened to for so long. There's also a lot of mistrust. So these systems also have to go along with trust building. So I say this, not that I have the magic solution, but I think one of the solutions that we're thinking through, unless there are capacity and resources from the federal end to make sure these structures are set up and put in place and they have people to accommodate, it's just going to be somewhat be a patchwork, as opposed to an integrated and efficient network of community outreach and engagement structures. So thank you.
Patrick, do you want to go ahead and say something, and then I'll chime in with a reimagine angle?
Yeah, happy to do so. As I lower my hand, hi, I'm Pat Clark. I'm with a firm called Jackson Clark Partners, based here in Pittsburgh. And yeah, it doesn't surprise me to hear what Jordan said, and I'm sure that other people will follow up on that. The community engagement system has largely been limited to areas like community planning and community development, and largely in urban areas or in sort of standardized comprehensive planning processes that are generally driven not by the community part of community development, but the development part of community development, which ensures that they often leave the residents and the people of a place behind and rarely engage them and get them off their ass to participate and carry things through. I think one of the models that is out there that works very well are the requirements for HUD's Choice Neighborhoods program, where they have demonstrable examples that you can engage folks at a level that isn't just sort of your standard, show up at a meeting or go online and do stuff. My business does a lot of work that actually goes to people's doors, uses those opportunities not just to gather broad community-owned data in preparation for development, but also connects people with resources that they need at a household level. I bring this up particularly because I've been in discussions with the folks at Land Force. They've been partnering with me in a community called Penn Hills, which is the second largest municipality in Allegheny County here in Pennsylvania, outside of Pittsburgh. And we're going to try to use that to actually help drive Land Force's a workforce development programs, so that we hear from people who are not necessarily engaged in traditional systems to get them into a workforce in other systems. So yeah, I'm excited about all of these opportunities because I think it can bring that level of best practice that has really made a difference in equitable development in communities, and not screwing up communities through development that Choice Neighborhoods has been able to do, including here in Pittsburgh.
Thanks, Pat. So one of the goals, yes.
Sorry, Quentin. I just saw in the chat you'd asked a question, and I have one quick sentence to follow up. You had asked a question about sort of options to solve that, and I think one of the things that we're sort of rallying around is ongoing federal funding to pay community people, the residents themselves, so these structures aren't just the sort of entities that oversee, but actually paying people to form, for lack of a better term, these citizen advisory councils. As I think Patrick mentioned, and we've probably all been privy to, and they're experimenting with this in the Great Lakes region through some of their toxic cleanup programs, that as opposed to sort of annual or every 6-month volunteer meetings, we're actually paying a subset of community members to stay engaged, and that they're being compensated for their time, they're being compensated for their input, and they're being compensated for being a conduit for their own communities. And so I think what we're seeing is in terms of federal budget, very reasonable amounts of money. We're talking about hundreds of thousands of dollars over many communities can be paid to community groups. And so these aren't just fully volunteer structures for the people who are most likely to not have the time, not have transportation, to be juggling maybe family care. And that if we really want to engage communities and respect their time, we're compensating them. And this is sort of a model that's being sort of, at least in the Great Lakes region, I have one foot in the Great Lakes and one in the Ohio River, it's somewhat being experimented with. And I'm sure there are refinements that can be made, but it's really treating community members as not just collaborators, but actually compensated members of the endeavor. So I just wanted to answer your question that you put in the chat, and I had not seen it. So
Thank you. So one of the goals for this session was to figure out how Reimagine can support communities in drawing down funds. And so the last few minutes here, I wanted to see if anyone had any thoughts on that. One of the things that came up that I think Reimagine has been thinking about doing anyway is, and we have been doing, is tracking the funds, notifying people when they are available, and having like a living website. And I we'll find that after I'm finished, but just quick brainstorm. Does anyone think about or does anyone have any ideas for how Reimagine can support your work related to this? Charlene?
Hello, I'm trying to get on here. Okay, well, can you hear me? I can't get my phone up. Oh, there I am.
Yes.
Hey, how about instead of ideas, let's start with, I'll give you my situation, tell me what you could do. How about that?
Sure.
I'm in a very poor county in southern Ohio. Lots of green land. Very many of us would like to have ecotourism. Okay, so we need lodging, we need Wi-Fi, and basically our county is so poor, we have like one person in the Chamber of Commerce. They haven't even had the funds to organize the tourism part. Then someone goes on to a better job. It keeps collapsing, okay, every time this effort goes through the county. Very many of us are interested in that aggregation of a bunch of, for example, I have a bed and breakfast. So people come in, they enjoy the area, they have music, arts, parks, and then they go away and, producing money for the region. Because there's another faction that wants to just, bring in more power plants all along the river. But without the money or a coordinating position there, how do we start this, How could you help, like me, or getting someone in there funded that could actually do this on-ground organizing?
It's a great question. That I don't have the answer to at the moment.
And Charlene, I love the fact that you pose your specific, communities vision, right? And that I think that's where we started off with in terms of this keynote speakers is getting this, realizing this vision. And I don't think I'm going to do your community justice by trying to come up with an answer in 5 minutes, because it goes much deeper than that. But you've listed a lot of issues, and I think that's where you start to see who else might have those same issues, and start to combine your, like I said earlier, combine your forces and see if you can start to find those internal resources to stop the turnover from one person to the next, and bring in the lodging and the Wi-Fi and the needs that you need to make this eco-tourism a reality. So, but I exchange my information on there and love to talk more about you with and reading what other communities similar to yours have done and tried, and where they're seeing successes, where they're seeing obstacles, and how they overcome it.
Are there other people here that have citizen-based initiatives that can be funded that can then hook into local government and be a consultant or something like that?
Charlene, would you want to share your information in the chat really quickly so that we can reach out to you and connect you with someone perhaps after this? But I think Stephanie has a response, perhaps.
I was just going to say the hub does that in West Virginia with the communities we work with, but what state did you say you're in?
I'm in Southern Ohio.
Yeah. I have some people in Ohio that I could probably connect you with, Charlene.
I would love to know that so we can get moving on this. We've been waiting on the county for years. It needs some push. Yeah.
Sure.
So I just have one other thing. I'm trying not to talk too much here, but I guess one thing I didn't get a chance to mention in my comments to the whole group was that we have seen, so the hub has been focused on Appalachian Regional Commission funding for the last 6 years because ARC put a lot of additional funding into some more creative funding approaches. And one of the things that we've seen with that as an example is that when federal funds are increased, the first groups that come to the table are the most organized, and the ones that already have an idea of what they want to use that money for. They might have to think bigger than they had been thinking before, but it's sort of just a small adjustment. And so I feel like that's where we are right now with the federal resources that we're talking about. Is in 2022, the most organized groups, the ones that were really ready for this rapid increase in funding are the ones that were putting in applications. There's a real cliff of drop off after that if resources and technical assistance isn't put into helping leaders like Charlene and other people around the region figure out how to grow their capacity, how to work with their municipalities and counties, how to take their ideas and put them into actionable strategies. And there's a strategy for how to do that. There's there's work that works around that. And one of the things that I would suggest Reimagine Appalachia does is invest in doing that work across the region. And that's really about like bringing people to the table, ideally in person, to really talk through what are their ideas, what are the collaborations that they already have in place, what are the barriers, you know, so it's just like the kind of nitty gritty work of building capacity of that sort of second layer of groups. And I would say like the second layer of groups is the people that are showing up today. You know, it's people that know about this, they are thinking about this, they don't know how to access the resources. And so that I think would be a high value proposition for Reimagine Appalachia, to put some time and resources into bringing people together to build their capacity.
Thank you. Jeremy?
Yeah, I just want to second everything Stephanie just said, and I need to reach out to you, Stephanie, and talk about how we can work together, because, you know, my organization RMI is a national, we sort of call ourselves a think tank and work on clean energy in particular. And this opportunity that I've talked about with the loan program office is really exciting. You know, I guess I didn't say it earlier, but there are two things worth noting. One is that the statutory language is completely silent on who can apply for the funding, except that federal agencies can't apply for other federal programs. And so that means potentially an NGO or a community group could lead this kind of a project. But the other thing to note is they want to do big projects because because so much authority, they want to get the high value projects done first. And so we're talking about like $100 million projects. And since that is probably pretty intimidating to like a single group, what we're trying to do at RMI is connect those groups with people that they could partner with. So whether that be a utility or a developer or as we've talked about a little bit, stacking some of these incentives together so that maybe, for example, if you want to do a solar project, you can also take the tax credits, the clean energy tax credits, as you build that project. You connect it with maybe you connect it also with the ecotourism piece that you talk about. So are there developers that would be interested in investing in hotels, for example, investing in some of that infrastructure? And also, it's worth noting the broadband money that's in the COVID rescue package, as well as the infrastructure law. So that's another layer beyond what we're talking about, what Stephanie's talking about. What Stephanie's talking about with the capacity building, I think, is that first step. And we'd love to be helpful on that and think about ways that we can support local leaders as they sort of navigate all the things that are going on. So
great. Thank you, Jeremy. I appreciate that. Everyone, thank you for your comments, your questions, and sharing your stories and participating in the Jamboard. Quentin, thank you for all the emceeing you've done. And I will see you back. Our breakout session will be ending just in
coming back. We're so eager to hear how your conversations went.